welcome to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff. The show is heard on WBCQ The Planet every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, coming out of the beautiful Monticello, Maine. And today is Columbus Day. I do take this show a few hours, usually a day or two in advance. Anyway, but it's Columbus Day, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Columbus. And also I want to comment on the primaries. But before I do, I just want to mention that Camp Constitution Radio is sponsored by Camp Constitution. Visit our website, campconstitution.net. Among other things, Camp Constitution runs a week and a day long family camp in beautiful Ringe, New Hampshire. It's a 1 week. The camp runs next year's camp runs from July 10th to the 17th, and you can go on our website, campconstitution.net, to find out about it. We also have a book publishing and pamphlet, or brochure, booklet publishing arm, Camp Constitution Press. You can visit our online bookstore to see what we have to offer. We're actually in the process of publishing something that's been out of print for many years. It is a U.S. Senate report on the Article 5 Constitutional Convention procedures. It concerned two bills that were introduced back in 1979 by Orrin Hatch, who chaired the committee. And it's 1,300 plus pages. Not exactly ripping reading, but it's excellent research. It is available in PDF format, but we have it. We're going to put it in. We're going to reprint it and make it available for those serious students of this issue. Back in 1979, they held hearings. And the bottom line is that Congress believes it can make laws guiding in Article 5. They've submitted laws or bills over the years. None were ever passed, but this is sort of evidence. The Senate wouldn't have hearings that lasted days and compile lots of articles. The document isn't just about people against an Article 5. There's testimony pro and con. There's also numerous articles that came from law journals. But some of the Article 5 supporters are of the impression that only a handful of fringe people back in the 70s had any opposition to it here. That's why they've never had one, just fringe people who have no impact. But anyway, so it's something we're going to make available. We'll have it on the online bookstore probably in a couple of weeks. And we're not going to put a whole lot in print, but we'll make them available. And also you can go to the Camp Constitution Scribd.com page and find it. I think it's entitled 1979 Article 5 Constitutional Convention Procedures, the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on the Judiciary Subcommittee. So anyway, and you can also visit our YouTube channel, and you can see not just some of the classes that we have at camp over the years, but some of the activities as well as this radio show. We put it up on YouTube, and so I think this is show 36 or 37. So you can find all of them, and hopefully copy and paste the ones you think that are particularly of interest to you. Anyway, so again, today's Columbus Day, and there's been so much. Columbus has been maligned lately, the last couple of decades, in this crusade to wipe out all vestiges of our history and our culture, the good. And Columbus, of course, Thanksgiving, Christmas, all these kinds of holidays are. We have to be. Thanksgiving was the evil pilgrims abused the Indians, and Columbus was a genocidal maniac, and this is what you get. Actually, there's an incredibly good book on the subject that I recommend, Columbus and Cortez, Conquerors for Christ by John Eidsmoe. And John is a constitutional scholar, historian, lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force Reserve. Now, this book was published back, I think, in the mid-'90s. And John is still very actively pursuing the liberty movement. Let's see, the first edition came out in 1992, so you can probably find it on Amazon. But he goes into, it's a real strong defense of Columbus and his mission, that Columbus was a devout Christian, a cross-bearer, and his goal was not just to, claim the new world for Christ. And There's been so much misinformation. One of the things we hear a lot about is that, and a lot of people have been guilty of this, that people thought back then that the world was flat. And Columbus knew it wasn't flat, and therefore, well, that was a myth. The people back then didn't think the world was flat. They thought the world was smaller, and that Columbus could have sailed westward and find a trade route to the Indies a lot sooner. So the idea that this is a myth, and there's a lot of anti-Christian and even some anti-Catholic. I happen to be a professing Protestant Christian, but I know that there are some people of the Protestant persuasion that don't like the Catholic connection, so they'll say this. And in fact, I found that error in a homeschool textbook. So I do recommend the book. I think it gives a good defense of Columbus, and perhaps the greatest authority on Columbus, maybe in the world, was Samuel Eliot Morison, the Harvard historian. I think he did a 4 or 5 volume book on him. And he gives obviously a good clean bill of health. Yes, unfortunate things happened, and Columbus may not have been the best administrator, but the idea that he was some kind of genocidal maniac is just absolutely absurd. So I recommend the book. I'd like to talk a little bit about the primaries coming up that are happening, the campaigns, the debates, and what I tell people is that the insiders, the folks who are promoting the New World Order, they pretty much have had the office of the U.S. president for quite a long time, and the idea that it will somehow will change because of an election, this upcoming election, this idea of we'll be able to get the right person in the White House and kind of roll back some of the big government agenda, it's probably not going to happen. And every 4 years, people get all excited about the candidates. And, you'll see people on their Facebook pages with Cruz or Donald Trump, pictures of Trump or Rand Paul and so forth. Now, I do believe in the process. I believe that we have an obligation to participate, and we should get behind candidates of our choice. And with the hope that that person will be the right person for the job, et cetera. But the problem is we focus so much on the White House, the executive branch, and so little on the most powerful branch, which is the United States Congress, or specifically the House of Representatives. Our founders gave us frequent elections every 2 years, and that's your term limits, folks. So you don't need to have an amendment to have term limits. Every 2 years you can vote that person out. And unfortunately, people get lazy. They don't even know who their member of Congress is. But they may know the president, they may know the vice president, but they don't know the person in Congress that represents them. And the founders gave Congress most of the powers. They have about 30 powers, where the president only has maybe half a dozen. So why do we focus so much? Because this is where all the media attention is on the White House, but very little is on the Congress. Not as exciting because there's 435, and they only represent maybe 650,000 people each. So I would say, yes, support your candidate. And I'll talk a little bit about the candidates and my take on them. And I want to point out, too, that Camp Constitution Radio, Camp Constitution, does not endorse any candidate whatsoever. That's not what we're set up to do. Our goal is to help inform and educate people. And my question to anybody who asks me, I said, the question I would turn is that what is that person's position on the Constitution? And then you judge by that. If the person is a constitutionalist, then they're most likely worthy of support. Now, by the way, saying that you're a constitutionalist doesn't make you one. And there are a lot of people who think they're constitutionalists but aren't. So that's the challenge here. So anyway, Congress, the House of Representatives, says the purse strings. They're the ones that appropriate the money. They're the ones that declare war. They're the ones that the Senate does treaties with approved treaties. They're the ones that impeach. So they have so much power, and that's where you should focus. Find out who's running in your congressional district, and that's where you should spend most of your time. Now, let's look at some of the candidates that are just quite a few Republicans and so far just a few Democrats. Donald Trump is getting a lot of people excited because he's talking about some of the things that I wish the other candidates would talk about, illegal immigration and our position in the Middle East and so forth. I would be very leery of Trump, his history. I don't think he's a constitutionalist. In fact, pretty much isn't. He is saying some things that we may like, but if you just the more he talks, the more you hear him, you realize that he is not a real person in the patriot community. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that he was hobnobbing with Hillary Clinton and donating money to her and her foundation. So I don't think Trump, and I personally don't think he's going to last that much longer. Some people tell me that they think that he's going to get the nomination and then back out and make sure that the Democrat wins. I don't know if that's the case or not. Let's see, Ben Carson. I have to have a lot of respect for Dr. Carson, especially at that prayer breakfast where he made Obama feel very uncomfortable. I don't think he's a total constitutionalist, and I know he's saying some of the right things, and he's probably a good man. And I would suggest that if he when he does drop out, if he does drop out of the in the primary before New Hampshire, maybe after New Hampshire would be the first primary in the country. I would recommend that he run for Congress. And now Rand Paul is someone that, in my opinion, might be the best of a bad lot. Rand Paul has a really good voting record in the Senate. He is not like his father totally. I know he's come out in favor of this free trade agreements, and then he's opposed it, and then he's in favor of it. So I'm a little leery of that. I know he's a little bit too close to some of the neocons. I think he backed Senator McConnell in Kentucky, and the argument is, well, he's got to play football. He's got to play footsie with these people, so he'll get their support. I tell you, the neocons will not support him when the time comes. They will stab him in the back, and he'll learn that. You can't lie down. You lie down with dogs, you get up with fleas, as the old saying. Who else we have, Bill? We got Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz's voting record isn't too bad in the Senate. I think he's like a 75 or 70 or 80 on the index I look at, the Freedom Index. I do. My biggest problem with Ted Cruz is his wife's connections to the Goldman Sachs banking industry and the fact that she's a Council on Foreign Relations member. That would be my biggest concern. You don't just become a CFR member because you send an application in with the annual dues. And the Goldman Sachs, they're the ones that are backing carbon credits and Agenda 21 and all of the negative things. So that's my biggest concern. Marco Rubio, I don't think he's going to go too far. He is supposed to be this great conservative, and he's Hispanic, so he's politically correct in that regard. But he's an open borders guy, and you may remember a couple of years ago he was one of the gang of 8 that were trying to that supported this amnesty reform, so-called amnesty reform or immigration reform bill. He is not a constitutionalist by any stretch. Then you get Lindsey Graham. Lindsey is part of the problem. He is a hardcore neocon, moderate to liberal. They used to call them Rockefeller or limousine liberals, and he's definitely not the person. Now, as I said earlier, Congress is the key. I started getting involved. I think I cast my first vote in 1980. I was in the Army overseas before that, and I tried to vote absentee ballot for an office, the U.S. Senate, and I wasn't able to do that. But I voted for Ronald Reagan in the primary, in the general election in 1980, and I was very excited about voting for Ronald Reagan. And I thought, boy, this guy is saying all the right things, and he's going to do the right thing. And then it came down to the first couple of months in office. He authorized an increase of the debt ceiling. He sent money, federal taxpayers' money, to communist Poland. And a lot of people like Reagan. A lot of conservatives think he's the best thing we've ever had in the White House, since Calvin Coolidge or since George Washington. He also his administration was responsible for the building up of communist China. Some people may remember he visited communist China. And back then the argument was, well, you see, there's communists. There's the bad communists, the Russians, and the Chinese communists were the good communists. They don't like each other, so we got to support somebody. And that's like telling me there's two gangs in town, and we back one gang over the other, but they're still gangs and they're criminals, and you don't back either one. Reagan, what really got me turned off was when I read an article in the local newspaper that Reagan had sent $500 million of military hardware to communist China, and I thought, okay, something's not right here. And that was the beginning of my awakening in the process. So in '84, I did vote for him again, but I kind of held my nose. And then '88, you had Bush and you had Dukakis. This would be George Bush Sr. And Bush was a Skull and Bonesman, a Council on Foreign Relations, a Trilateral Commission member, and so wasn't Jimmy Carter. So you didn't really have much difference. And some people I knew, held their nose and voted for Bush over Dukakis. Being from Massachusetts, we know I knew Dukakis a little too well, and so he didn't. So in '92 was kind of interesting. We had a Rhodes Scholar, Bill Clinton, who I also think at the time was a CFR, a Trilateral Commission member. This good old boy from Arkansas. We thought, he sings in a choir. He must be a good old Baptist boy, and his wife's a little funny background. But boy, Bill's a great guy, and he called himself a Christian. And you had then you had, of course, Bush and Bush didn't look like he really wanted to get his seat. But then you had something interesting phenomena. You had Ross Perot. Ross Perot came out of nowhere as far as the political process. He was involved in a very successful business, and he was coming out strongly against NAFTA, and rightfully so, and he got a lot of excitement. And in the election, he got something like 18 million votes. That was pretty good, and no doubt some of those votes took votes away from Bush, because most of the people that voted for Perot were probably Republicans. I don't think you had a lot of Democrats that were going for Perot, probably a small percentage. So Clinton gets in. Clinton does the same stuff that Daddy Bush would have done. He gave us NAFTA, opened up Vietnam, and established normalized relations with Vietnam. He tried to get socialized medicine through unsuccessfully. And then in '96, you had Bob Dole. Bob Dole was a very uninspired, longtime senator, moderate, connected to the insiders. I don't know if he was can't remember if he was a Council on Foreign Relations member, but he may have well been. He was surrounded by that type. And then, of course, 2000, you had Al Gore, the former vice president, running against George W. Bush. And George W. Bush was pretty much a chip off his dad's block. He surrounded himself with globalist insiders, and we were stuck with 8 years of that. In '04, who do we have in '04? I can't even remember who ran. It was a very close election. Kerry and Lieberman, right? I think it was, Kerry and Lieberman. And Kerry that was an interesting race in '04, because you had, probably for the first time, two Skull and Bonesmen both getting the nomination from the main parties. Let's see, the Skull and Bones doesn't have that many members, so what are the odds of two Bonesmen being both? Well, we know the odds, because the people in charge, the New World Order people, the insiders, the globalists, or whatever you want to call them, the insiders, they're the ones that pretty much, so we think we have choices. We have controlled choice. These are the people we're putting in front of you, and so we do choose between what the establishment gives us. And then we have this, and then we had Obama. I know, interesting, Obama sort of came out of nowhere. He was an organizer, a Saul Alinsky type organizer. He himself didn't know Alinsky, but he studied his tactics, and he runs for the state senate in Illinois. And he's only in there, not even a full term, I don't think, and he becomes the keynote speaker at the 2004 convention, Democrat convention in Boston. And wow, people were saying he's the wave of the future. He's the face of the party. All of a sudden, then he runs for the U.S. Senate and wins the seat, and he becomes president. Talk about fast tracking somebody. And now we're stuck with 8 years of Obama. So this next election will be interesting. It will be interesting to see the Democrats. Biden has now talked about running. Hillary Clinton, I think she's a very poor candidate. If I was a liberal Democrat, I would love Hillary for what she stands for, but I would say you're a bad candidate. You're just not the right person for the job. As much as a Democrat may love her contempt, I'm saying some Democrats, not all Democrats, but the activist, she's an ardent abortionist. She's an ardent promoter of homosexuality. She hates the United States with a passion. She hates conservatism. She hates Christians. So she's the right person, but she's not. She just doesn't have the right personality. And I think that's going to, and she's got baggage, especially with Benghazi and some other things. So I think, and then you got Bernie Sanders. Bernie has been a long-time socialist. He runs as an independent. And some people like Bernie because, first off, his voting record is better than a lot of Democrats and Republicans. And there's something that we refer to as the Sander-Niester Index. When you see how Bernie votes, and when you're to the left of Bernie, you know you must be pretty bad because Bernie is an admitted socialist. Bernie was working with Ron Paul against auditing the Fed, and then when it got to the point where the bill may pass, he ended up watering it down. So Bernie will run interference with the establishment. He'll, as a senator from Vermont, as a member of Congress from Vermont, you have to vote in favor of the right to keep their arms at the federal level if you want to keep your job in Vermont. Even though Vermont's very socialist, even the socialists like to be armed in Vermont. So they tend to be very pro-Second Amendment, but I guarantee you the minute Bernie, if he was to become president, he would be a big advocate of disarmament. There's no question in my mind. And he comes out against these free trade agreements and these partnerships, but I guarantee you that he gets the nomination, he gets elected, he will totally embrace all of these. And incidentally, I mentioned Ross Perot, and lots of people say Perot was sort of a spoiler. They ran him on purpose. They wanted him to lose. That's possible. Something else happened like that in the election of 1912, where you had Teddy Roosevelt, Bull Moose. He ran on the third party. You had Woodrow Wilson and Howard Taft. Taft had been the sitting president. And Taft was a skull and bonesman, but for some reason, he was going to stay strong against the Federal Reserve. He was not in favor of the Federal Reserve Bank. So Teddy Roosevelt, who still was very popular, does something unprecedented. He runs on a third party. And the man who ran his party was a man named Raymond Robinson. He was the campaign manager. Now, Raymond Roberts, he is not a household name, but if you read a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island, his name comes up. He was an official. He was part of a delegation to St. Petersburg, part of the Red Cross mission during the Bolshevik Revolution. And there was a book called British Agent. It was written by a British diplomat who happened to be in St. Petersburg at the time of the revolution, and he was shocked when this American, who was a young American upstart, he was on the phone to Lenin, and Lenin's nephew had given this fellow a hard time, and Robbins is basically calling the shots, telling Lenin what to do. So in 1912, of course, the Bull Moose Party did not win, but it took votes away, and we got stuck with Woodrow Wilson. And I would say that Wilson did more damage in his two terms as far as advancing the agenda. He sort of made it possible. He gave us the income tax, the Federal Reserve Bank, the inheritance tax, income tax being the 16th Amendment, and worse than that, the League of Nations and World War I. So even though we became an empire to a lesser degree during the McKinley administration, 1898, this is when we became the arsenal of democracy, when it was our job to have a mission around the world. And unfortunately, we never looked back. So I do suggest that that you should vote in elections. I don't think we should. I know there are some people say, you shouldn't participate. No, you should. and that you should get behind a candidate for president if you find some that you're liking, and that's all good. But as I said earlier, the action is not in the White House or the executive branch. The action is in Congress. Just pick up your Constitution, and you look at Article 1, Section 7 and 8, and you will find all the powers that Congress or that our founding fathers delegated to that branch. Article 1, Section 1 says that all lawmaking abilities are vested in a Congress, which shall consist of a Senate and the House of Representatives. And that is where the focus should be. And people say, well, do we need to hit 435 constitutionalists to turn things around? No, we don't. We don't even, we need a majority, even a small majority. We could have fewer than, 218, 219. But if we have to have committed constitutionalists, if you had 150 to 200 committed constitutionalists, they would have control over a lot of the wet finger types. I'll just do what I have to do because see which way the wind is blowing. And I also want to say, I know that the local print media used to have so much power. They don't have as much power as they used to. They're still influential. And, of course, you have the big online media outlets as well. But thanks to the alternative media, like this radio station, and like dozens, I've met hundreds of other radio stations and online sources, the local newspaper does not have the power like they used to have to make you or break you. There were people that they would vote the wrong way because they knew that if you lived in Boston, the Boston Globe would come after me, or the Columbus Dispatch, or the New York Times, or the Sacramento Bee, or the Chicago Tribune, or whatever newspaper. They would massacre me if I opposed this. Well, now they don't have that power, and we're still living where. We're living in an era where there are a lot of people that are functionally illiterate. They're being distracted by all of the sports, the obsession with sports. And by the way, I like to watch a good football game or a baseball game. I don't see that in itself as a bad thing. It's because we're obsessed with it 24/7. If it's not the sport itself, it's the talking about it. You can get on, you listen to these sports shows, and you see these boy men get really passionate about things, about their teams and about the players, and they know so much. They know their salaries. They know what school they went to. They know their wife's name. They know their average and their percentages and this and that, but they don't know the member of Congress. And many ladies are the same mindset. They also have their distractions, and I would say that it's a sort of a deliberate thing. And then you look at, your husband and wife are both working. You're working time and a half to make ends meet. And then you come home and you just don't want to do much. You just pick up your kids at the daycare center, and that's the problem. And I say all these things will all happen. Our enemies know exactly what they're doing, folks. So anyway, I think we're coming to an end of this particular show. I want to thank you for listening. If you're interested in helping this show stay on the air, please consider, or not consider, but do become a sponsor. If you go to our campconstitution.net website, you'll see a sponsors page. And, for just a donation, you can put your business on there. If you have a business, or you can just make a donation through PayPal to help our camp program. Or we also, you can visit our bookstore, online bookstore, and see what we have to offer, some of the great products we have. You want to see what we do at our camp? Well, go to the website. You'll see a link to YouTube, and you'll see some of the classes. We just uploaded a couple of Chris Ann Hall's presentations she gave at camp. Tom DeWeese, he did a really great job on the Teaching Economics 101. That's available online. So again, thank you for listening. God bless you. Until next week. This is Hal Shurtleff, Camp Constitution on WBCQ The Planet.